Super Mario 64. When Nintendo released the Nintendo 64 in 1996, they needed a game that would prove the console was worth buying. Super Mario 64 was that game, and it delivered in a way nobody had seen before. Instead of moving left to right across a flat screen, players could now walk Mario in any direction, spin the camera around, and explore fully three-dimensional worlds. It sounds simple now, but at the time, it was genuinely disorienting in the best possible way. Kids would just stand in the castle courtyard and run in circles because the freedom itself felt new. The game went on to sell millions of copies and became the blueprint for how 3D platformers would work for decades.
The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. Nintendo released this in 1998, and it immediately set a standard that most games are still being compared to. You played as Link, a young boy who grows into a hero across a story that stretched over 2 different timelines. What made it remarkable wasn't just the size of the world or the quality of the puzzles. It was the feeling that the world existed on its own terms. Shops closed at night. Characters had routines. The music you played on the ocarina actually changed things around you. It was the first time many players felt like they were inside a story, rather than just moving through one.
Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Sega had introduced Sonic in 1991, but the sequel, released in 1992, was the one that turned him into a cultural icon. The game was faster, bigger, and added a second character named Tails who could follow Sonic through every level. The speed was the point. Everything in the design was built around the feeling of momentum, of barely staying in control while the world blurred past. It was the opposite of Mario's careful, deliberate platforming, and kids who loved it were almost evangelical about it. The console war between Sega and Nintendo became very personal for a lot of people, and Sonic 2 was Sega's strongest argument.
Street Fighter II. Capcom released the original Street Fighter in 1987, but it was the 1991 sequel that created the fighting game genre as most people understand it today. Street Fighter II gave players 8 distinct characters, each with their own country, backstory, and set of special moves that required specific button combinations to execute. Learning those combinations felt like learning a skill. Ryu's Hadouken, Chun-Li's Lightning Kick, Guile's Sonic Boom, these moves became part of a shared cultural vocabulary that extended well beyond gaming. Arcades built entire sections around the game, and when the Super Nintendo port arrived in 1992, it became one of the fastest-selling games in console history.
Mortal Kombat. Where Street Fighter was about competition and technique, Mortal Kombat was about spectacle and shock. Midway released it in arcades in 1992, and the combination of digitized real actors, brutal combat, and finishing moves called fatalities made it immediately controversial. Parents were alarmed. News segments covered it. Congress held hearings. The controversy over Mortal Kombat and a handful of other violent games directly led to the creation of the ESRB rating system in 1994, which still governs how games are labeled today. The game itself was genuinely fun to play, but its cultural impact went far beyond entertainment. GoldenEye 007. This game arrived on the Nintendo 64 in 1997 and changed what people thought a console shooter could be. It was based on the James Bond film of the same name, but developer Rare built something that went far beyond a movie tie-in. The single-player campaign let you approach missions in different ways depending on your chosen difficulty, and the objectives actually changed. The multiplayer mode, which let up to 4 players compete on a split screen, became one of the defining social experiences of the late 90s. No gaming setup felt complete without it. It proved that first-person shooters could work on consoles, and opened a path that games like Halo would follow just a few years later.
Pokémon Red and Blue. Nintendo released these 2 games in North America in 1998, after they had already become a phenomenon in Japan. The concept was straightforward. You played as a young trainer, caught wild creatures called Pokémon, and battled other trainers to become the best in the world. But the execution created something closer to an obsession than a hobby. There were 151 Pokémon to collect, and neither version of the game contained all of them. To truly complete your collection, you needed to trade with someone who had the other version. That single design decision made the game inherently social. It moved off screens and into schoolyards, and the trading became as important as the playing.
Crash Bandicoot. Sony needed a mascot for the PlayStation, the same way Nintendo had Mario and Sega had Sonic. Naughty Dog delivered Crash Bandicoot in 1996, and the character immediately filled that role. The game was a third-person platformer with tight level design, a wisecracking marsupial as the hero, and a visual polish that showed off what the PlayStation could do. The levels moved in a direction that felt new. Sometimes you ran toward the camera, sometimes away from it, sometimes sideways, and the variety kept each stage feeling distinct. Crash became the unofficial face of PlayStation for a generation of players who grew up with the original console.